friends. So excited to see you all rolling in today. You've reached the Python Pulse. My name is Dawn Wages. I am the Python Community Manager here at Microsoft. And we have a really exciting episode for you today. I say that every time. I mean it every time. I have one of my favorite humans on the stream with us today. So the order of events, we're going to first start out with a few announcements. Then we're going to dive into the meat of the episode, which is about Python, Pi, and OpenAI. So let's show y'all this screen. There you go. All right. So I want to first start out by saying that we have Venuless and we're going to be at Pi Cascades. Yes, we're going to be at Pi Cascades on March 18th and 19th, the Microsoft team. And we have two awesome Microsoft people speaking on our behalf. We have Sarah Kaiser and Brett Cannon giving really, really exciting talks. One about syntactic sugar. And then I'll let Sarah, who is on the stream today, give you a little bit more about her talk. I also want to highlight a few more announcements today. We have Python Functions 3.10 support is now generally available. The Azure Developer CLI, we have a February 2023 release. Click the link to learn more about that. It's all in the show notes. We also have Python VS Code templates. So if you're interested in making Python-based LSP extensions, we have a Python template for you to be able to develop more. We love giving shout outs to the community who develop more extensions. And so you may be able to see your name on this stream or in some of our blog posts. We also have the Azure App Service that now supports Python 3.11. We're really excited about that. We've been able to push that out before some of our competitors. So I'm really, really excited for you to try that out. Give us some feedback on how you like that new support. And we also have tons of AZD templates that have been coming in, and we have more. So for any of your development and deploying scenarios, specifically, this link will take you to the Python templates, but they do support many languages. Any of those deploying scenarios that you have in mind, we are trying to support that so you can get into the cloud faster with Azure. All right. So announcements out of the way, I get to introduce my cool friend, Sarah Kaiser. Hi, how are you doing?
Hey, how are you going?
So I would love for you to start out with the reference that I mentioned in the announcements. You mentioned, I mentioned that you have a talk coming up at Pi Cascades. I'm putting you on the spot because this isn't an agenda. Wow.
Yeah, no, I'm super excited about it. It's called The Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Development Environment. Whenever I make talks, I try to find like some sort of weird or interesting kind of like in this case, it's actually a poem. So like there's the movie, but there's also a poem from, I think, about the 1800s that had that line in it. But it coincidentally perfectly describes kind of that whole feeling of you want to, every time you start a new project, you're starting from nothing.
Okay.
And how do you make sure that you can help get the context you need, not only for yourself, but reproducibly for all of your friends and coworkers and stuff.
That is really cool. I really love the movie, and I had no idea there was also a poem with "Color Me Cultured." Now I appreciate it. You've just given me all the background. And so, where are you streaming from? And then also, audience, if we have like more people rolling in, this is really great. Put in the chat where you're watching from. I'd love to say hello and shout you all out in all your cities. So where are you streaming from, Sarah?
I am from the overcast-ish Seattle right now.
Okay.
So
your background is really cool. We were chatting about it before the call. That's where you're from, the ether is where you're streaming from.
From cyber. The cyber.
And I'm over on the East Coast. I'm in Philadelphia. Shout out Philly. I'm really, really excited for the chat we have today. So for everyone who's just tuning in, this is going to be more of a general discussion. I really want to talk about what this conversation is and is not. We're going to talk about our favorite thing, Pi Day. I have a little sweet I got from my little, you brought your pie! Yay!
I found pie yesterday. I did not make it. I am not a baker, but it is some delicious. I would prefer pumpkin. Also, please let me know in the chat what is your favorite pie. But mine is pumpkin, but that's kind of out of season right now. So strawberry rhubarb is a close second.
I had my first, okay, this is not pie or python. I had my first rhubarb pie the other day and it was like so good. Anyway, all right. So we are prepared for our pie day discussion. We're also going to be talking about responsible AI, Python, and kind of the context around it. This is not going to get into any sci-fi discussions. We're going to stick really based in the practical and the context. And we are joined with, Sarah, who let's start out. Would you consider yourself a Python or excuse me, a AI expert? What's your background in that?
I'm not, I don't know about expert. I wrote neural networks for babies, so I guess I'm like a preschool teacher. No, I have a PhD in quantum computing and kind of a lot of the research background and an experimentalist who also likes pi. Yes. As a side note, my username everywhere online is crazy, the number 4 pi, like as in PI, because I did pi memorization contests as a kid because yep, very normal. But yeah, so I this surprises probably no one, went into physics and science. And turns out, I think what people, fall under this category of machine learning or AI, really is pretty ubiquitous in a lot of science because it really is just describing kind of ways you can repeat thing or like you're doing inferencing, like you figured out how you want the things that go in and to change into the things that go out, and you want to do that at scale. And so that's very similar to things like experiment design. If you're trying to basically learn things dynamically about whatever your science experiment is, machine learning is usually something that can help, although I'm not sure we always call it that. It's usually can also be enhanced statistics.
Interesting.
So,
Right. So there is
mhm.
some, basic vocab, and please correct me if I mis describe things, that this is like a learning experience. So we have analytical AI. We also have generative AI, which is kind of really taken by storm in the industry, and really what a lot of people are talking about lately. In my experience, I used to be in e-commerce, so like the most closely related are like recommendation engines. Is really where I got
Mhm.
started. They were like a huge explosion in like 2016-ish area. So can you tell me a little bit more about like the applications of AI, and then maybe how you've used it, and then how Microsoft might be using it, and across the industry potentially? Yeah, big
uh,
questions.
Definitely. And obviously, I have a fairly narrow experience of kind of what is the breadth of all of machine. These are very large terms at this point, like
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
programming in Python. Cool. What are you doing? I don't know. Python can do a lot of things.
yeah.
Um, yeah. I think trying to rewind back to the first part of the question. Um, yeah, e-commerce is as you were talking about, definitely somewhere where we see a lot of that. Um, the kind of context in which I initially started using machine learning was experiment design. So like
Mm,
you have a bunch of knobs on your experiment.
mhm,
You are trying to learn something about it. You're trying to learn a parameter, you're trying to learn a state or something like that, and you kind of can describe what happens when you turn one of those knobs, but you don't know like what the right order is to turn all of them, or like what setting you want for the whole machine to like get you the answer you want, whether it's getting it fast or getting it correct. And so like it's kind of a way of sometimes offloading kind of brute force tasks like that.
okay,
you can
okay.
you can do something slightly smarter than brute force by basically using matrices, because uh, the thing that made me feel a lot more comfortable about all the machine learning stuff was that it's matrices. And those were things that I liked from my math class. Like that's because importantly, computers help us with those. I don't have to do that by hand.
Yes, yeah, and we'll be getting
So,
into that more as well. But I love the kind of
mhm,
assistive lens that we can
mhm.
put on it as well in some of these use cases. Okay,
Mhm.
great, cool. Um, and so we have some products at Microsoft really kind of facilitating the use of AI, and or kind of productizing it a little bit. We have Copilot. We also have Azure OpenAI as well. So can you as well? So can you tell me a little bit more about those as well?
Yeah, and to be clear, I'm not working on developing any of these tools. I'm a developer advocate, so I basically just get to play around with them and see see how I can break them.
Right.
That's kind of my favorite thing to do is break things. Um, but yeah, you I think you hit on something important, Don, which is um, a lot of machine learning and AI really is kind of best situated to be an assistive tool. And so, like one of the now at my job at Microsoft, the primary way in which I'm using AI or machine learning is basically having it help me write code.
Okay.
um, so there's in as a part of VS Code, and I think now also some of the PyCharm IDEs, if I'm not mistaken.
Hmm.
From JetBrains, there is Copilot, which is a GitHub sort of developed product, but I'm using it in VS Code pretty much all the time.
Okay. Cool. Yeah.
um, it's really nice because I do a lot of data science sorts of things like more generally for my job, and I have a hard time. There's a lot of different tools and a lot of different APIs, and I feel like I always like, is this like a method here we're doing apply, or what's the
Hmm.
exact syntax? And basically, I kind of view how I use Copilot as just like my friend sitting around the corner who I can just be like, "Hey, do you remember how that went?
Yeah. Like,
Okay,
what's the
cool."
syntax for that thing? I don't know.
Yeah.
Actually,
How do
yes.
I do that again? And I can either write it out in a comment and ask it to expand. It does not always get it right, but what I find helpful is it gets me close enough that I can then use my my experience and be like, no, probably I want this for this parameter, but otherwise, I've got the rest of the syntax now, and
Right.
it saves me like 8 8 or more Stack Overflow queries.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm always looking up regex. The brain
Yeah.
of my existence. But yes, Copilot can help with that.
Hmm, hmm.
Cool. Awesome. Really, really great.
um, yeah, I think something that I like, apart from using it like to help code, like before I worked at Microsoft, I also worked at a kind of an engineering consulting firm. So
Okay.
like companies would come to us, like startups or companies with products, and say, hey, we want to rev it, we want to make a new revision, we want to actually take it to market. And I was the research engineer. They would be like, okay, we want to do crazy thing X. Can you prototype it for us? And pretty much every conversation we had to start with was, a lot of times folks came up and they're like, we want AI in this. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
it's a mixing bowl. Okay, well, we want AI in it. And I'm like, okay, so let's talk through this. Maybe there's a good way or reason to, maybe there's not. But I think that's kind of what still keeps me really excited about, kind of this whole field in general, is like there is a lot of cool things we can do with it. There's lots of cool things it can help us do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, where does it make sense to do that though? Because it's not necessarily a blanket, put it on and it makes everything better.
Absolutely.
Nothing in life is like that.
Totally. Totally.
Except maybe pie.
So then, so being like thoughtful in some of these executions, and your experience in that's really interesting and provides a really cool lens on the way that we'll kind of continue to have this conversation through the stream. And I appreciate that because it's a very unique role to be able to look into AI. It's not necessarily on the AI researcher level, which is really like a lot of people. And it's also in the show notes. We have a white paper, and there's many that come out. Excuse me, a research paper that's many that come out on some of the new technologies um, in AI. How do you keep up to date with what's going on? I mean, it's like a bullet train, it feels like, as someone who's kind of on the outer rings of all of the development. Where do you look to?
Well, I think like many folks here, I'm kind of terminally online. So, I think it is a challenge to find good information about this because especially from the field that I'm coming from, more generally quantum computing, there's a lot of hype associated, and it's really, it kind of honestly has very similar vibes, and I'm just like, okay, we gotta practice practice our communication skills and critical reading skills. But I think I learn and kind of stay on top of things mainly from finding people who are actually working on stuff. Like there's definitely sometimes helpful things from big journalism outlets, but when I see stuff like that, I usually try to like click through and find, okay, where's the actual open source project? Where's the actual folks who are doing the development? What are they saying?
Right.
Just because, yeah, sometimes clickbait is a thing, but yeah, there is, as you were saying, so much cool stuff with what we're kind of really learning that we can do with this, which still just kind of blows my mind. It's still just matrices. Like it's matrices and stats.
Okay.
But
Can
yeah.
you actually like give maybe a little bit more context on that? Like I'm harkening back, and I think I'm nodding. I'm following, but can you give more context on matrices and stats and what you use on it? How do you interact with it on a regular basis? I'm sure it's mostly in package form, packages, right? Or
oh yeah. Yeah, I mean that's kind of like why I fell in love with Python in the first place. Was I had tasks like this that I wanted to do. I was writing stuff in like writing algorithms from scratch in C++ or whatever was the ordained low level language at the time, or but I love Python because I can use these packages like to interact. Like it's, if you have a very specific task you're working on, there's probably some way that you can optimize it more than what a generic Python package might have. There are also very specialized Python packages that are really pretty hard to beat because they've worked on that a lot. But yeah, I'm interacting with it, I think, in the same way that a lot of folks here are, which is using libraries like TensorFlow, scikit-learn, Oryx model representation, stuff like that. I mean, I think what's I sometimes remind myself of is like, yeah, all of those packages abstract away those kind of details that do take a lot of it's not even necessarily hard math, it's a lot of bookkeeping, right?
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
the actual operations usually aren't that hard, but this is what computers are for. They can keep track of these things. They can I don't want to do the math by hand. And so I just find it really, really cool that not, the community, the open source community has put so much effort in, and all of like so much research gets very quickly translated into these open source packages because it is open source. So, you don't have to wait for some product necessarily to integrate it. It's there. The tools are there. The models are there. OpenAI has open source Whisper and some of their other models. Like you can just go use it. And I think that's, something that I find between having all of the open source tools available and then trying to find what are the good and really helpful ways that we can use this is what I get really excited about.
Yeah, dope. That's really exciting. Cool. I'm glad. Okay. So I don't want to cut you off because we can go off in a lot of different directions. So please interject if you have more things. And then also for everyone watching, we have like a lot of really great movement of people joining too. Feel free to put some questions in the chat and talk with us about it. Like we are live and really exciting to get that back and forth conversation going on some of these things. So next in my my agenda, I guess, we talked about the context of which we're going to use AI and when it is good and when it is not, a little bit briefly before. Can you tell us about when it may go awry, or just kind of how can we grok what AI does, right? Can we understand maybe intuitively in that neural networks for babies? How did you describe it for babies? And then can you describe it just a little bit more for me?
Well, yeah, I think that one starts with, this is a ball, this is a neuron.
Oh, that's so cute.
There's kind of a big jump. I may have it behind me, but no, let me think of I'll explain how I kind of things make sense to me. That doesn't necessarily mean it is intuitive or makes sense for anyone else. But,
fair, I love that caveat. Thank you.
Yeah, like so a lot of I'll pick an example here so we can talk about, because I think it's hard to say in general, like how does it all go wrong? I mean, there's a bajillion sci-fi movies that can give us great examples for that. Like,
yes.
They're wrong is a very broad term, but like, you know, something we've seen a lot of lately is folks playing around with large language models. So for example, ChatGPT is something where basically what it's trained on is a absolutely massive corpus of text. And it is I think it's a generative model. So like you prompt it and it will try to guess what words you want to come next.
Okay.
Because it really is, you give the question, which is the input to, I guess when I'm thinking about most machine learning stuff is there is a black box, right? Obviously we're manipulating what goes in there, but if I'm trying to think about from like a user perspective or a product design perspective, I mostly try to just abstract that as here's a resource that I have.
Yep.
I can put a question in and it's going to give me some things out. And in like some of these cases, it gives you a word and then it thinks about it again. Given that word, which word should it say next? Given that word, which I think kind of maybe helps explain why, sometimes it doesn't make a lot of sense. It's not thinking of, first of all, it's not a person. It's not, it is literally a stats box that is just, kind of like sports stat, it's just trying to compute what is the most likely thing next, based on all of the words it's seen so far. And so that means, though, if you're asking it something that it hasn't seen a lot of, it can go we've seen plenty of examples of this on the internet over the last couple weeks and stuff.
Yeah.
If you ask it questions about things that weren't in that corpus, it's not going to know. It's going to try because it's going to pick the most probable thing, but there isn't any understanding behind that. It's just trying to guess what word you want to see next based on everything it's seen. So a great like example that, when I'm trying to say I have a task or a product or something, somebody's come up to me and said, hey, let's add AI to this. A great kind of an example you can try is, say I want ChatGPT to do math. Obviously, there's lots of examples of math in the corpus that it's trained on, which I can't remember exactly off the top of my head, but it's, basically most of the internet with all the good things and bad things that come with that. But, there's probably lots of examples in that corpus of adding 2 + 2. So if I ask a large language model that's been trained on a corpus like this, it's probably going to get some of that basic math right. And that
Right.
seems really like magical. Like, oh, wow, it knows math. Also, it's not an it. It's, again, just it's like a calculator. It is just a calculator.
Mm-hmm.
But if I start asking weirder and weirder math questions, not even necessarily like theory questions, just still like simple addition, but with larger and larger numbers,
Mm-hmm.
it's very easy to like. I mean, you can try this on your favorite, whether you have some Python package or if you train your own model. But basically, yeah, you start asking add 5 4 6 3 8 2 7 5 plus something else. Like it very quickly
Right.
won't give you the right answer
Right.
because
Because
that's not in its corpus.
interesting. Right. The question is
Hmm.
incredibly obscure and may not be reflected even enough times to like cross-reference or however the algorithm is set up. That makes sense. That makes sense to me. And I think you made a really good, interesting point with some of the words that you chose in describing like what its limitations can be, because it doesn't think or like really feel. And although we want to ascribe some of those values to it, and there's really like in like sci-fi and levels at which we like are aspirational with some of it too, and like really these could be the fledgling stages of something like really interesting and groundbreaking like that, and these are really groundbreaking uses with it. But it's interesting how like we are making that distinction of like a person and like the corpus and the body of knowledge that it's going to have. And then also the black box part of it was really stuck out to me, because it is doing all of these advanced computation that is specifically offloaded because it is too much for a person to reasonably do by hand. So when you're getting results as quickly as it can provide results, it does turn into a black box because the tracing back on all of the ways that it made the decision is incredibly tedious. So I can understand how that would limit what some of the outputs and the use cases could be as well. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, I appreciate that distinction. Cool. Interesting. Did I
Um,
misrepresent anything, or do you have like thoughts on some of the ways that I might have interpreted your statements?
hmm. Is this a reinforcement? Are we training each other? I mean, yeah. No, I think that makes sense. And, at a very practical level, as a developer, I want to either make tools for myself or
Hmm.
I'm asked to do a thing.
Hmm.
um, if there's anything tedious about it, like as you put it, that's probably the first places I'm going to look to see if there's something I can use a tool from or a algorithm from like an AI or machine learning context. So
Yeah.
a good example of that is like I help run a couple different open source kind of projects and community calls and stuff.
Cool.
Um, we want everybody to be able to attend our community calls and stuff like that, but time zones make it really hard. I'm sure everybody we've got folks from South Africa and Morocco.
Hello, hello.
Like thanks for joining. But getting everybody together to discuss things is really hard. And so like yeah, we try to record things, but then somebody has to I don't know about you, but like if I watch recordings, I usually like speed it up and then like also probably get distracted, so it's really hard to do that.
Right.
But we can use what would be the ideal thing? Well, somebody sitting down and transcribing the whole call so that somebody can just like search or control F, just kind of make it more accessibility, I guess is probably the
Yeah.
more general way to describe this. But, that's a perfect task for like the open source project from OpenAI, Whisper.
Mm.
So that's
Okay.
a audio to a transcription and translation model that works for a ton of different languages. And so, that's a very practical way in which I've actually just been using the tools because like I don't want to sit there like obviously that's an important role. Like
Hmm.
there are folks that do that professionally and they'll do it way better than just my little talkie box. But like it's something that is low effort on my side, but is a big lift and a big improvement in accessibility for others in the community. So I see that as a big win.
Yeah, absolutely. Like as in the transcript, the auto transcript of this stream, is it going to catch PI or PIE and our interchangeable references? So I can appreciate that as well. Cool. What can you tell me a little bit more? I mean, this is a little bit off agenda, but I'm really interested in your open source work as well. So can you tell me more about like Whisper and your context with it and how you use it and all of that? That sounds really cool.
Yeah, so I've been working in open source basically since I started working in Python stuff because I was working my first Python library was called Instrument Kit, but it was what I was using to communicate to a bunch of lab equipment that had like serial ports and like all kinds of like really weird like USB drivery sorts of things. So
Yeah.
but I found an instrument that had a bug in it, and so like that was kind of some of the first my first interactions with open source. And so like using open source for open science and reproducible science is kind of like what I'm really passionate about and what I still work on a lot. And so like I help manage the QIR, quantum intermediate representation project, which is a cross company collaboration to basically make a machine level language description for quantum hardware.
Interesting.
That's a lot of words, but basically we need a way to talk to new computing devices. You know, like
Okay.
and you know the thing is, people who currently work on like low level C or machine like firmware level sorts of programming tasks.
Right.
That's all we're doing.
Right.
You know, it's
Right.
you don't need to reinvent the wheel. And so there's a huge community though that's kind of like collaborating on this with a very widely varied background. And you know, that's the best way we've found to kind of collaborate on that is really mostly in person, like synchronous communications, just because so many kind of questions come up. And you know, we'll have somebody, you know, kind of give a short talk about something that they're interested in or something they tried to do, and there's just so many different kind of opinions and feedback and stuff that it's really hard to do async.
Right.
Which does kind of suck if you can't make the meetings. And so like we were talking about this, we do this on Discord, which is also kind of hard from a recording perspective. But yeah, we kind of talked through it as a community and figured out what we wanted to do to make things more accessible for folks who couldn't come at the times, or you know, just try to do other things to expand the accessibility by rotating times and locations for meetings. But yeah, I had just seen actually on I think it was Mastodon, someone tweeting, I guess, about this Whisper project, and it had just been open sourced. And so I was like, awesome, let's use open source tools to solve open source problems.
Yeah.
And, you know, even apart from the actual tools that we use to build open source, like that are machine learning open source tools,
Right.
something that I got to put a pin in to remember to talk about is other open source projects that help us do the machine learning stuff responsibly.
Right. Right.
Because with the whole with great power comes great responsibility, yada
Mhm.
yada.
Mhm. Mhm.
But you know, if we're starting from those tools, like I was super excited. And so like I started talking to some of the folks in GitHub issues. Like there were some features, you know, like diarization of speakers, which is basically where when it's transcribing, it says, okay, this is a new speaker. Like
Mm.
it probably doesn't know their name, but they can say, it can say speaker one, speaker two.
Right.
But yeah, it's
Interesting.
it's a really cool project. It's
Right.
also Python, like, and you know, here again, like if you're a Pythonista, you can basically just uh, roll up and be like, all right, I can just let me kick the tires on this. And you know, maybe you need to integrate it differently for a product or something else later, but it
Right.
makes it really easy to just try. um,
Yeah. Absolutely.
and mhm. And also like Copilot actually helped me write. So like I was trying to just first experiment with this. I just was using Click, the like command line, the package in Python that allows you to make a quick command line tool.
Okay.
So I was just to make it a little bit easier to kind of like run my Python script a lot. Um, but it helped me write all of the arguments for that. Or
Cool.
Copilot did rather. And yeah, then in like less than an hour, I had something that was just transcribing our previous recordings and just was trying to spot check them
Right.
and just see, and also see what other cool things people put together, because everybody was sharing like, oh, I made this project that adds this feature, or here's the Jupyter notebook with an example of how to do this. I don't know. It's really fun to kind of, as you said, like this stuff is happening right now. And, I think part of what makes that really like what is different about now is there is just a lot of computing power available and available broadly, because, some of the reasons that these models, like after you train them, they can sometimes be packaged fairly small, but like the training part can be huge.
Interesting. Yep.
You just need so much memory, so much resources. And so, I mean, train a new model is not just like, oh, I'll just run another copy of my script.
Yeah.
I will,
Non-trivial. Okay.
I need massive cluster resources stuff, which does then make it important to know what goes into models when they are such a huge investment.
Interesting. I hadn't thought about that. It's come up in like other conversations, really kind of the resources necessary to be able to kind of contribute to this space. But then not only is open source, but also some of these like packages and tools are democratizing the access to these like the resources, and then the out, like being able to create it and then the output of those resources, right, and like to make it a product. That's really really interesting. One of my favorite parts about open source, similar to you, very much in the web dev circle camp. I mean, I touch analytics. I have a passion for it, but like I would not consider myself an expert. But really, that was my entire career in open source as well. I mean, I started learning out in the open. I started attending conferences, and I would do sprints next to the creators of some really famous packages, like right next to them, and we're just hacking away. And I'm doing whatever in my mind feels like a dinky little project, and I feel like they're contributing and changing the face of like the request library like right next to me. And in some of that is true, and it is a lot more accessible. There are absolute barriers, and don't want to undermine some of those barriers to get into open source, but it is more accessible than some people may perceive it to be, and it's very cool to see that translate to the way that you were able to access this community as well. I mean, that's really really encouraging. Cool. Wow. Very very cool.
And like I think that's a really kind of interesting point to touch on, is like you can obviously if you know a package, having something like Copilot be like, oh, here's the syntax you forgot. What if you're trying to learn something new? Like I kind of forgot about this, but I was trying out a new package recently, and like, had the documentation open, was looking through their going through papers as if that was how this worked. Looking through their examples, trying to find, something similar to what I was trying to do. That's pretty much how I always start anything. But I just kind of started, I even just like wrote the name of the function that I was, trying to start out with. And I was like, it just gave me an example. And then I was like, well, I guess I could try running that. Shift enter.
Yeah.
I'm in Jupyter notebooks. Those are my favorite. So I hit shift enter and it worked. And I was just like, oh, well, thanks.
Right.
And so, yeah, like it actually was then, I saw the pieces that it filled in for me, and I could go back and look at the docs and be like, okay, yeah, that was probably what I was looking for. I just didn't know the right word or term, for the process or task I was trying to do that was kind of specific to this application. But, it's kind of like a fun reverse search sometimes.
Very cool. And it's interesting because there's human intervention kind of built into some of the ways that you can use these AI models. Is that how does that like kind of manifest? Typically, it just depends on what the request is and what the tool is, and how does human intervention typically play in some of these kind of conversations?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's as we were talking about before, you always have the black box. You put
Mhm.
in something, something comes out. And, I think as we've learned, we don't want to just take that uncritically. We really need to be cognizant of how we're using that result, making sure we understand where it came from. Uh, but yeah, human intervention, I think, is a good kind of something in our toolbox that we have to basically try and make using these tools safer, more accessible,
Right.
more responsible. So yeah, you want something to kind of check. Oh, are you generating something for like in the programming context, maybe entirely wrong programming language? Like,
Right.
should we check, or should we check if it's saying racist or misogynistic things, or um, you know the problem, you might say, well, oh, if we just train it right, it won't do that. The problem with that is it kind of like a kid, it only, but it's not a kid, it's a calculator. um, it only knows what you've given it.
Yeah.
And so if the corpus that you are giving it um, has those things in it, it's gonna spit them back out to you at some point. And so,
Interesting.
um, yeah, this is why like the intervention piece I think is really important, because we can't, there's I don't think any sense in which you can have a perfect, pristine starting like training set or corpus that you train on, because
Right.
that's not possible. So, I think this is a good example of responsible ways to use AI and machine learning. Is we are kind of in the loop. Real humans are in the loop, kind of checking and guiding, the actual answers and results at most every step.
Right.
um,
Right. Because this is
yeah.
ultimately scientific experiments. Right. Yeah.
Mhm.
Interesting. Very cool. And that makes a really good segue into the thing that you wanted to put a pin in too. Um, what are some tools that you've worked in that you know of, and like ways to approach responsible AI? Um, we mentioned a few when we were prepping for this call, which was really, really cool. So I'm excited to dive in.
Mhm. Yeah, I think one of the first things that I look for if I find a new tool or a model that I want to use is model cards.
Okay.
So I don't know if you have a link for that, or
Oh, I do.
I
Yes,
can.
I do. I'll add it.
Um, so this is something I think a lot of different like companies and projects are kind of working on an explicit standard for these. But the link I have that we found yesterday was basically to the kind of initial proposal for what this looks like.
Mhm.
And projects like Whisper have a model card. And so kind of what that tries to capture, I don't know if you ever like remember from like high school chemistry having the chemical safety data sheets.
Oh,
or like
yeah.
or perhaps workplace training things like here's your material safety data sheets.
Mhm, mhm,
It's kind of like that, but for a model,
mhm.
because there are a lot of things that went into the model. There's lots of things that go into the chemicals. And you also want to know how to safely use them. And so, in the same way that we need to know what PPE, what personal protective equipment goes for chemicals, we need to know kind of what are safe ways, what are some of the cautions or warnings about using this model. Maybe it's stuff related to in its training data set, it was kind of missing this chunk. Maybe we could only find data for, years past 1980 and we don't have data, or we have data for the whole state, but we don't have data for this county because their reporting processes were different. Kind of basically trying to note all of the things that you as a user of the model might want to know and kind of learn from or incorporate how you want to use that data.
Interesting.
And, I think kind of as we were talking about before, making some of these larger models is like really expensive, like thousands of dollars expensive and stuff like that. So, you kind of want to, you don't want to put all that money in and just have this black box and you're shaking and you're like, okay, well, it does pretty good.
My first few tests,
chuck it in production. Let's go.
Oh
no. Not endorsing that. That is bad. But it's like getting the receipts for kind of what goes into those models, and is something that I think is a lot, that they're often written like they're not super long, and are, I think, really helpful, not super technical usually. Like it's really just kind of like, here's my sources, here's how I trained it, I use this algorithm.
Right.
And that helps you as a user. Say you want to go try using Whisper, or say you want to go try some other, retrained version of GPT-2 or something like that.
Right.
It's kind of the information you need to be able to make good choices about it, because, I would not want to use a model that was maybe trained only on like test scores for like men and apply that to like, I think there's a bunch of great examples of like doing bank approvals where basically they train on stuff that's missing data, or it encodes biases, like, and if you know that about the model because you've seen it in testing, because after you train you usually test, those are things to note, such that you don't want somebody to just from a bank be like, oh, this has the right inputs and outputs, let's just go use it.
Interesting.
So yeah, I think the open source community has done a pretty good job of like both writing these up and I think developing tools to kind of help kind of make these scorecards, or more general than just the model cards, but if you have like a tool that's using models and stuff, kind of give you kind of a better reporting of
absolutely
what to look out for.
Absolutely. And it's like a tool for clarity that's seen in other scenarios. I'm trying to draw connections and parallels. So like labels on a can, for example.
Yep. You want to know what allergens are in there.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
Just kind of general consumer safety sorts of things that you'd really hope to be most places.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's a big one. There
Is it
are
weird? I'm like I'm like nerding out and getting excited about these tools, and I didn't know. It's just like so process oriented. Like, yes, let's go.
I mean, I love a good set of rules, and also I love tools that help me. Like raise your hand if you like linters and formatters, because you never type it the way it's supposed to be. Save on format on save. But yeah, no, having tools that help you as the developer, you as the engineer, designer, use the cool stuff in ways that you actually want to, and hopefully with less unintended consequences. Go in eyes open,
yeah,
as it were.
Cool. And for those who are just joining in, we've been having a really, really great chat about Pi and Python and OpenAI. And so really this section we've covered, and we started to uncover, I think there's a few more tools that we would love to get into. We started to uncover some of the tools in which we're using to do responsible AI. We had a great chat in the beginning, if you can rewind to some of the beginning, where we talked about our experiences in AI and our work, and mostly with Sarah's background in it. and then also ways that it's been popping up in the industry, specifically with Chat GPT and Copilot, which has been kind of a really cool way to program. And I use Copilot in VS Code. So that's been really, really cool. So to keep going, like you mentioned that there might be some more tools that were used for AI.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think one of them is called, well, as I mentioned, there's a bunch that do scorecards.
Okay.
I want to say Deno was one of them.
Okay.
I'll pull a link up and put it in chat, but it's
Cool.
one that basically kind of like you might have a linter or a something in your pipelines that you run every time you make a commit, like in GitHub Actions. It would just kind of go through and check like, hey, is there, it also helped you generate a ethics.txt that basically was kind of a way of capturing the summary of like, okay, we've gone through and checked here we're attesting that we've actually kind of caught up on all of those things.
Interesting. Oh, that's cool. Okay, great.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And I don't know if it's helpful, but I've got my notebook up here, and in case people wanted to kind of see an actual example, yes, I'm just trying to.
Sure. No, take your time. So super excited. Okay, this is dope. Let me look.
Bigify me?
Yeah, let's bigify you. Let's do.
I can also screen share directly.
No, we want to do. This is good. Aha! Here we go.
I'm down in the corner. I not currently, but have done a lot of Twitch streaming. So this is. Please ask questions in chat. It won't interrupt me.
I need to up my Twitch game. That's an aside. We keep talking about it. Up my Twitch game. This is so cool.
Yeah. So, like, for example, I actually, so this is my Python development profile here. Dawn mentioned this way back at the beginning, but basically, I have so many extensions installed that basically when I want to do Python specific things, and even in this case, like with Copilot and everything and activated, I just have a profile here that I can activate. That has everything installed.
I forgot to share your blog post. Sarah wrote a really awesome blog post. And I was about to use like a curse word to talk about how awesome it was. It's an awesome blog post. And I'm going to post it in the chat while you're showing us this thing too.
Yeah, thanks. But yeah, basically, I just have this is a notebook from a workshop I gave. It's basically grabbing data from PyPy about Jupyter, the organization's projects. But so that mostly doesn't matter. What happens, like when I have Copilot kind of installed, you can just add it as the extension. No, it is enabled. I would not like to disable it. So you can kind of see, I always make sure it's clear when I'm doing live streaming or coding. I'm also trying to now, when I write code, make sure I have like in comments or something like that, just say, hey, I co-wrote this with AI. Kind of like you can do co-commits, like on Git. In Git, you can say multiple people made a commit. Basically, now Copilot is my co-committer. But I don't even remember what this API. It's clearly an API object from this package. If I just start typing API, these first couple suggestions, those are like kind of your standard IntelliSense or just something that's like looking through what are all things defined. But as soon as I start to ask for like, okay, I want a method on this or something, I kind of get these italicized suggestions. And that's actually Copilot saying, well, you've made a new API object. Probably you might want to actually check your rate limit, which probably is something I do. I'm pretty sure I have this somewhere at the bottom of the notebook to just when I'm running it a bunch to check. So like, yeah, and I haven't actually even run anything in the notebook yet, so it's just doing that based on what it sees here. I can also, if you install the labs kind of extension as well, there is a lot of cool kind of not just write code for you. Like there's things here like where it'll take code and explain what it does in so like let me try that. I've highlighted a function here that just does a lot of manipulation. And it tries to give me an description of what happens is like it's returning a data frame and we rename it. So sometimes that's helpful if I want to write docs and I just don't want to, I just wanted to like, then I just copy and paste this and put it back in. And
documentation is so important. Anything that helps us get documentation is great.
And then there are other things too that I've also done sometimes is when I've found code samples or found my code from like a long time ago. You can in the same way, like use some of these brushes and I can say, make that more readable. I have no idea what it's going to do. And look, it wrote because I didn't have documentation in this yet, it actually wrote me the doc string and such that somebody could actually understand what that does. But I just said, make it readable.
And I got excited because it's in my list of things. What are brushes? I see it. I hear you say it. We've actually had conversations and I've let it go by. And I think I get it with context. Can you tell me a little bit more about brushes? How do you use them and why are they called such?
These are good questions.
Okay.
I don't have like a technical docs answer for you.
Sorry, I'm going off script here.
No, that's okay. I've only started using these recently. Mainly it was because I ran into some legacy code that I was just like, I cannot figure out what's going on here. Just in an act of desperation, I highlighted it and made it readable.
Okay.
And then it did. And I was like, huh. I also used make robust. So like basically if you have okay, I don't think it's gonna
this is what live demos are about. This is so cool. I love live demos.
I still don't even know what it exactly did because I didn't highlight anything. But yeah, basically they're, when I'm typing, that's just like generate the next code. If I want basically to ask a different question, not what is the next code, but given this as an input, it's basically like changing the black box that you're using with the intos. And so these are, in some of these, it might be, and this is a guess because I don't actually know the internals, but like, readable, it's still taking a chunk of code and saying what should be next. Like, how should I change this code as opposed to how do I write new code?
Yeah. Yep.
And so basically different tasks, I guess, is kind of how I think about it. The other fun one that I know other folks on my team real quick have been absolutely loving is test generation, which currently only is supported for JavaScript and TypeScript, but they've been doing some VS Code extension stuff. But you can just like highlight stuff and it will go write honestly pretty decent tests. And like, obviously this is the point where like, then you go look over it and make modifications, but like, writing boilerplate is awful. I did see someone
delete all the tests that like give you errors that you don't want to see.
You have to go like change, you copy and paste it and you slightly change things.
Yeah. That's the good
Timothy way yeah. And Timothy asked, do I save my snippets in my VS Code profiles? I totally do, actually. I hadn't for a while, but boy, I really like that. If I make this a mark, I have one for insert snippet conda environment template.
Yeah.
There are fancier ways to do stuff like this, but when I start new projects and stuff, I always want to make sure I have an environment file going. So
yes, I use it for Django. Yeah, I use it for Django templates when you're like recreate. Yes, for when things you're doing over and over again. Absolutely, keep it dry when you can, and then use snippets for when you can't.
Yeah. So anyway, I just wanted to show some really cool, like, this is basically how I'm using the AI stuff at my actual work. And I think it's really great because it's helping. I mean, it's not like trying to super speed up everything that I do. I mean, really, it just kind of more so helps keep me focused on the problems I want to solve and not just get like rabbit holed into I'm spending, like I can't figure out how this regex isn't working. Why is it not working? And then like half a day later, you're like, well, I kind of wish that I figured this out sooner.
Right.
So it just kind of fast tracks some of those rabbit holes, and
That's so good. And that's a
keeps
really
me writing the code I want to.
yeah, and that's like such a good full circle for our whole conversation. And it looks like we're about out of time. I'm gonna go into my outro speech. It's been so great to chat with you, Sarah, and it's truly been a blast. I mean, I really enjoy it. Yes, I mean, I haven't even
Pie time.
We've been yes. I've
You
been
promised
too
me
busy
pie at the
chat.
end of this, Dawn.
I know I did. You buy your own pie though. I did not try to buy you pie. I'll buy you pie when we're in the same city eventually. Same coast at least. But thank you so much, everyone who joined, for joining another episode of the Python Pulse on Microsoft Podcast. Thank you so much to our producer, Peggy, who's been pivotal in getting the stream out every month. I was lucky enough to have Sarah 2 months in a row. I'm so excited. Our next chat is going to be the last Python Pulse before we join for PyCon. We've been doing a lot of great work within our team to get ready for PyCon. So make sure you're checking out the ACD templates. Keep your eyes open for the Azure sample repo. We've been doing like a lot of really great work to get things out there for you and to push that. So keep up with us. You also, if you just stumbled upon the stream, you can find us on Twitch or YouTube. If you like us, please leave a comment, subscribe to the VS Code channel. There are a ton more awesome videos that stream under this banner. And you can find the Python for VS Code team at Python VS Code on Twitter. You can find Sarah Kaiser. You want to say your Mastodon?
I was just typing it out, but I'm on math. Thank you. I'm crazy for Pi 314. This is why this is my favorite holiday on math. Stadon.xyz.
We had to get you on in time.
Nerd.
And you can find me on Twitter or Mastodon. I think we're going to have my Twitter pop up. But yeah, that's me. I'm the Bajoran engineer. And if you want to chat with Pythonistas at Microsoft, you can join our Discord at aka.ms/Python-Discord. I'll put it in the chat and put it on the screen too. And that's where we hang out and talk about all sorts of things, snakes. So I appreciate everybody joining. It's been
Space and Snakes.
Space and Snakes. Actually, that was like my favorite document I have running with you. Space and Snakes. It's great. Again, always awesome. Thank you so much for joining, y'all. And we're going to be back here on the second Friday of the month, second Friday of every month at 11 a.m. Pacific time. We do talk DS9. We talk DS9.
Yeah, come talk DS9 to us on the Discord. I'm always on there because I'm on Discord. So if you have any other questions or fun thoughts or arguments you want to have, do you talk? Yeah. Also, people should watch the newest season of Picard. That's all I have to say about that.
Oh. Okay, we're divulging. We're over time. This is so great.
See you on Discord.
Bye, y'all.
I'll start the thread. Bye.